Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. This week we're going to take a look at some of the most mysterious and yet most significant locations within the Halo lore. These are places that we've never seen in game, but were heavily detailed in the late Greg Bear's Forerunner trilogy that released over a decade ago. Be warned, we're going to have some spoilers here as we're going to talk about locations both in the games as well as in the book. So if you're interested in the EU, I would caution you to turn away now. But if you're down for some spoilers, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump into it. Starting off, why even make this video? Is it because I'm looking for clicks and ad money? Well, maybe a little bit, but truth be told, one of the greatest weaknesses I think 343 has suffered is a failure to pay off the setups they've built. From Halo 4 to Halo 5 to Halo Infinite, we set up a story beat and then discard it immediately. And honestly, none is worse so an example, like I said, Greg Bear's books. The Forerunner trilogy built this frankly stunning and beautiful universe of Bungie era game lore. We have a bunch of Forerunner stuff, really fleshing them out in ways that Bungie never did. And we barely scratch the surface in games. We talk about these books that came out a decade ago and we don't follow up on them. And that to me is a shame. And I have other videos planned where I'll talk about why, in my opinion, that has caused the Reclaimer saga to fail in its delivery of a cohesive narration. And why I think the absence of some of these locations, as well as their significance to the lore, has been greatly disappointing, and hopefully 343 will reconsider in future games and we'll actually get to explore some of these places. But without wasting any more time, let's jump into the list. Starting with number 5, this one is actually going to be a bit of an easy one, and to be honest, you might think to yourself, well, we've been here before, and yeah, you'd be right. I'm talking about the Lesser Ark, Installation 00. Now, the reason why I highlight this as the location that maybe is not the most important we go back to, but I still think is significant to the lore as well, we spent some time there in Halo Wars 2, but we get no mention of it at all in Halo Infinite. We know that in Halo 3 we fired the nascent Installation 08 before it was able to be finished, which led to significant damage to the Ark. But it did not entirely sterilize it of personnel. No, there were still some Covenant remnants as well as Flood that survived, especially on board High Charity. Now in Halo Wars 2 we do go with the Spirit of Fire to discover the Ark again, as well as the Banished, obviously the opportunistic raiders we're all familiar with, and they had seized control of the UNSC research facilities, probably killing the humans there. We dislodged them in the game, but not all of them. And we also obviously follow up with Aatrox, not just in the books, but in Halo Infinite he's out and about, so that doesn't really bode greatly for the Spirit of Fire. Hopefully though, they are still around. We know that the Flood survived. They're still inside of High Charity because we play that in the Halo Wars 2 DLC. And that begs the question, well, if the Flood were able to survive in some format, does that mean that the Grave Mine exists, quarantined deep inside the crashed facility? I found that a little bit iffy, but everything that I've read suggests that firing of Installation 08, because it was not yet finished in Halo 3, did not actually truly sterilize the Ark like you would expect to a ring firing. Instead, there were survivors, especially inside of hardened facilities, as you would expect with High Charity. Beyond just the Grave Mine, we also know that Mendicant Bias was buried here after being tried and convicted by the remaining Forerunners. We know that from the flavor text on Sandtrap, Brutes had been excavating a location that may have, housed his Ancilla. And we know that the Banished were also looking for him. So we've had our fair share of Lesser Ark in Halo 3 and Halo Wars 2. Yes, I would agree with that statement. But there's a lot of reasons for Chief and the UNSC to go back. Step 1, reconnect with the Spirit of Fire. Bring some of those really awesome characters as well as vehicles and other lore elements into the mainline games. Like, it would be cool to see, Red Team. It would be really cool to see Cutter and stuff like that. Like being able to see some of the vehicles and pilot like a Vulture. Beyond just that, anyone who spent some time around the Halo lore is probably very familiar with the name Mendicant Bias, and you're probably tired of hearing speculation about him. But I mean, come on, Mendicant has existed in the shadows since Halo 2, and that's not like a retcon. He actually was like a named character, and it was understood the tragic nature of his existence, having turned on his creators after having been more or less corrupted by the Flood. He exists permanently, like more or less in purgatory, punished by his sins, living in absence of any contact with anyone. So it's about time we would see him face to face. And that takes me to number 4. Now let's jump deep down the lore rabbit hole. We're going to talk about Maethrillian. For those who aren't deep about it, Maethrillian was the capital for Forerunner Society, the Ecumen as they called it. Maethrillian was a series of discs combined together, a massive Forerunner superstructure. At its heart was Abaddon, a precursor Ancilla, an AI that mostly controlled the domain. The domain, again, if you played Halo 5, you probably heard it name dropped a few times, is a repository of all information, a quasi-afterlife, if you will. You don't really retain consciousness, but your memories could exist and be recalled by others later. It was like a shared knowledge for all Forerunners, and obviously provided a lot of significant advantages. But Maethrillian Maethrillian was destroyed by the one and only mendicant Bias. You will hear his name a lot because he's involved with a lot of things. Not just him, but Zeta Halo. Yes, the Zeta Halo from Halo Infinite. Back when it was much larger, Mendicant fired it. After slip spacing it directly on top of Maethrillian, he killed all but a few Forerunners that were in the system. It also heavily wounded Abaddon in more of a figurative sense because the technology the rings used was relatively unholy, and it caused this unraveling of precursor technology. So in a way, the domain has been denied to the Forerunners since, at least until 100 or so years after the rings were fired, when the Isodidact, not the, me and Halo 4 one, came back to Maethrillian in an attempt to re-enable the domain for humanity. Now, Abaddon wasn't so happy to see them. He killed one of the Forerunners, but they were successful, which is ironic because humanity had no idea what the domain was until Halo 5. At least they weren't using it, so whoops, you kind of died for nothing. But this 100% is an area the UNSC should be looking for. I mean, imagine we're seen as the tragic reclaimers of everything the Forerunners lost. So finding their own capital, kind of superstructure station, if you will, could shed light on many untold mysteries. How ancient humanity may have destroyed the Flood, why the Forerunners turned on their creators, and just precursor knowledge in general. Now, I'm not saying we completely unveil the mystery behind precursors. In some ways, I prefer they be left like the Forerunners were in the OG Bungie trilogies. You keep that mystery there to engage the audience, but it's still something we should dig into. And now, talking about location numero 3, this one is very closely related, and that's going to be the Greater Ark, not the Lesser, Greater. And for those that are unfamiliar and okay, what's the difference? One is bigger. Yes, actually, that is what the Greater Ark means, but it's also where the Forerunners fled following the destruction of Maethrillian. This is actually where Zeta Halo was built. Despite having been shrank down to the size of a normal ring, it used to be much bigger. But when the Forerunners ran there, they were quickly found by Mendicant, because that's what Mendicant does. He uses a technology, this concept known as star roads, massive unbending filaments of some sort of matter or energy that is more or less incomprehensible to us. These filaments being massive, moving things in orbit, they never really responded much to Forerunners because the Forerunners were dicks and killed their creators, but they were being leftovers from precursors able to be controlled by the Flood, because the Flood 100% are related to a single key mind, kind of primordial precursor consciousness that realistically encompasses all the hate and betrayal the precursors felt, because they're totally interdimensional beings that exist along all points in time like the aliens in Arrival. So the Flood, being a kind of karma-esque curse upon the Forerunners under the Mendicant, shattered the Greater Ark using these star roads that Forerunners had no idea how to control, and then blasted them with a ring, purging effectively the last of any surviving Forerunners that were located there. Faber, the Master Builder, and his friends were obviously taking some serious L's by the end of this conflict, and they kind of deserve it too. Now, the Greater Ark exists somewhere far away. Just like the Lesser, it's probably not in our galaxy, maybe not even in our own realm of existence. But finding Maethrillian means that the UNSC could hopefully unlock that location, as well as a way to reach it. There's a lot of technology and riches to be found, and yes, it is a hauntingly large, massive grave site for the last holdouts of Forerunner society. But if you haven't noticed already, the Forerunner, well, they kinda sucked. They were dicks to humanity, and we should not feel bad about looting their burial grounds for our own advantage, especially considering humanity's innate relationship with its old precursor technology, and none other but location number 2, Charum Hakor. Now, this used to be the homeworld of humanity, and it was likely a homeworld or a world that was lived on by the precursors before us. See, during the closing days of the human Forerunner War, Charum Hakor actually held out for decades. It only fell when the traitorous San Shayum, the prophets, turned on humanity, because they also suck, and it's a good thing they're borderline extinct. The Didact, this being the Halo 4 mean Didact, composed what humans had survived and surrendered, including the Lord of Admirals. And Faber, again the Master Builder, an arrogant Forerunner douchebag, then decided to blast Charum Hakor after it had surrendered with Zeta Halo for no other reason than seeing how his new weapon worked. Rather than do it somewhere where it totally wouldn't destroy a planet, he chose here, and in his arrogance inadvertently freed the Primordial, and obviously led to his own undoing, which is an ironic twist of fate. It also meant though that he destroyed all the star roads and ancient structures that existed in and around the Hakor system and on Charum Hakor, including none other than the Charum Citadel, which was known as an ancient precursor building or potentially even a temple of sorts that the humans sought refuge in. This is actually what we see in the Halo 4 terminals when they're being composed. Charum Hakor is told to us later to be a stale and dead planet, at least that's how it appears in the Forerunner trilogy when Chakas goes there with Bornstellar. It's largely left untouched. Now, some things in Halo kind of cross the line from sci-fi to paranormal to a degree, and I think this is a good example example. It's said that the atrocities that were committed here, not just against the precursors, but again with the destruction of their buildings and the humans that were left on Charum Hakor, creates a great sense of unease and pain amongst those who visit. So yeah, it might not be great for the mental health of humans that were, maybe to find it, but that is what VA claims are for. In the meantime, if the UNSC could start excavating, well, maybe they could find additional precursor ruins. And again, according to the extended lore, it's rumored that humanity has some synergy, some ability to understand and utilize that technology in ways that Forerunners could not, because, Forerunners killed their creators. We did not. Discovering, researching Charum Hakor could give humanity an insight that their predecessors did not have, and they could use that and leverage it to their advantage. Now last but not least, the biggest and most important unexplored halo is, drumroll please, Zeta Halo. Wow, you must be thinking, that is exactly where we play in Infinite. You are dumb. And yes, you are correct to both counts. However, it begs the question, 343, why don't we explore any of it at all? Zeta Halo, why? I mean, it's a good question, right? It was once consumed by the flood, with spore towers reaching high into the atmosphere, poisoning it. You had it break into pieces when a planet flew through its center. It featured countless battles with Forerunners and Flood alike. This is where Chakas became 343 Guilty Spark. It's where he was captured by Mendicant the Primordial. It's where Mendicant was corrupted by the Primordial. It's where the Primordial was killed by the new Didact. It's home to the Palace of Pain. It's a series of buried research facilities that experiment on humans. It contains deeply buried facilities that once housed the brain of Mendicant Bias, not just his floating kind of image. Zeta Halo was more or less Mendicant Bias's base of operations. It's where he was corrupted, and he, used that facility to destroy pretty much every other place on this list. Maethrillian, the Greater Ark, Charum Hakor, yep, Zeta Halo was there. And so we go there in Halo Infinite, and we spend a whopping 0 seconds actually uncovering the secrets that are said to be within. Unlike many of the things that are revealed in Halo 5 and Infinite, like the Endless and the Xanalin, these story beats were written a decade ago before Halo 4 by Greg Bear. Mendicant has been part of the series since, as far back as Halo 2. So it's kind of an outright shame that with all this build-up, we have no payoffs. And finally, we do go to Zeta Halo, and honestly, I think 343 just chose Zeta because it's important to lore without actually having the respect to go into why it's important. But we don't go any deeper than that. We introduce new characters like the Harbinger, but we don't talk about Mendicant. I don't even think he gets name dropped at all in the entirety of Infinite. We don't hear about the Palace of Pain. We don't talk about the Flood. We don't talk about what happened when Mendicant and the Primordial walked the surface. We don't talk about how the Primordial died. There's so many hidden aspects of the lore that were supposed to be here, and we don't talk about them at all, which is why I think it is absolutely the most important place that is unexplored that we should talk about is a location that Chief's very own feet are currently on. I know we'll never get an Infinite DLC, but if we had, I would want nothing more than a simple campaign expansion that takes us deep into the ring, where we actually see some of the terrifying and horrible acts that were committed on Forerunner and humans alike, uncovers some of the mystery that has been built up over a decade in books. Well, that about wraps up the list. Like I said, all these locations were featured heavily in the Forerunner trilogy, which came out before Halo 4, each being significant for humans, Forerunners, and the Flood alike. It simply blows my mind that we don't explore much of them in detail in the past decade, considering all the groundwork was done for 343. Why bother introducing new concepts when you could actually pay off concepts that you already teased to your audience? Or when we do finally get to see them, like going to Zeta Halo after having so much discussed about it, their history is more or less ignored and not even referenced. It's a shame to me because, 343 really had an opportunity here to dive into some serious story beats, but instead we got what we had with Halos 4, 5, and Infinite, where we really lack something cohesive. There's no narrative arc that flows well, and they had the groundwork to do the opposite. We had something that could have been good, but it more or less turned into a bit of a mess. I'm sorry to end on that sour of a note, but hey, maybe 343 will be inspired to come up with something a little bit different in the next issuing of games. In the meantime, though, I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. Be safe and take care.